Okay, so I'm going to show several things here. One thing I am going to save for the other classroom is getting started on the good paper. A couple of different ways that we can go about doing that. The first thing I want you to do is prepare a thumbnail sketch at the same proportion, so that you have a little bit of experience with what you're working with. Yeah, we're going to start with the Loomis method on that. When it comes to how detailed that you're going to be doing this, I really left it loose. I just wanted to make sure that I understood where all the different facial features were going to go. And made sure I had everything proportionate, right? So I don't need this to be perfect. In fact, I didn't even completely shade things out. I just kind of blocked in stuff that I knew was going to be darker later. So when you're doing this, I want you to take note of the difficulty that you're working with. If you have a lot of issues when it comes to like drawing this with the Loomis method here, you're probably going to encounter that same issue when we amplify, right? Because you're going to have to like make this 3 times larger. We're going to fill a whole page, right? If you have a clean sheet protector, we'll use that. If not, I have fresh ones that y'all can use. You're going to slide your image in there, okay? Then what we're going to do, and this is going to be a little bit of a diversion from what we've done in the past with the Loomis method, because we are changing a lot of like the traditional kind of 3/4 profile, all that kind of stuff. So it's not going to be perfect, right? And don't expect it to be, right? And you'll go through this process and discover a lot about what's going on with your face. We start with the circle. I find it helpful to remind myself that I'm going to have to bring that circle through the nose, basically, right? Because we're drawing just the cranium, right? Then we're adding the jaw. So I just kind of like create some dots through here to kind of help me start with that. In your case, you know, you have hair, so you have volume on your head, okay? So you're not gonna like literally trace the contour of your head because you all have like more going on. With me, I can do that because like there's nothing there. So when I draw this circle, I'm gonna get pretty close to the edge when I do that. It's important to take note of some of those norms that we talked about when it came to how the human face works, right? A couple of those being that your brow and your nose help frame in the ear, right? Several of you have photographs that your ears are not going to be very explicit. You're not going to be able to see them very well. So we want to be able to find where that ear is going to be so that we can get that angle cut away from the face, right? Knowing that that ear always has to be in the bottom back corner of that cutaway, right? When we're drawing that oval in here, that's going to help us a lot. One thing that I like to do when it comes to applying this over an image, instead of doing it kind of synthetically like we have been, is plot your y-axis over here first, right, in your symmetry area, and then make sure that it's parallel over here. Normally we started with that first. We created that y-axis that shows the tilt of the head up or down, and then we made sure that our symmetry line was parallel to that y-axis that was on the side of the head, right? This will make things go a lot faster for you. So what I do is I make a little mark in between the eyebrows, and then I come down and I locate what I feel like is the center of the chin, okay? Then what I do is I go ahead and connect that with a very straight line. If you remember when we do this, when we've done this in the past, we usually define where that brow is, okay? And then we select where that symmetry line is going to go. It wraps around, and then it has to go straight here, right? A lot of people accidentally, miss that step, forget about it, and then wrap it around the face, and then you're like, okay, I don't have room for the facial features that I need in there, right? So a couple of different cues happening here. If you have a flat spot on the side of your head, which I do, and I can see that pretty well, that's a good indication of where that ridge is going to be, that cutaway that we cut away from the sphere on. So like right here, my temple's another good area for that. And so as I'm looking at this, I'm feeling like that's about how mine's going to go, right? So I'm going to go ahead and create a y-axis similar to this one, since I was able to plot that first. So I'm just going to make sure that this is parallel here for the most part. And then knowing that my ear has to be on the bottom back ridge or corner of that oval, that cutaway, I need to make sure that my division here, which is going to line up with the brow, will sort of help to create that angle, right? So now I can go ahead and bring this over. Can't really see my eyebrows. It's kind of what sucks about going gray. Like being blonde. My poor daughter has the same problem. She has to draw her eyebrows in. But she has a redhead. Anyways, if you can see your brows, you're going to go over them to make that happen. Because I had to include my ear in this, it automatically allowed me to use this line for my nose. That's going to work for some of you. It's not going to work for everybody. Okay, I'm going to work to help you figure this out really, really cleanly, because we're going to use this model for quite a bit. So this actually becomes my nose right here, my nose line. So I'm just going to go ahead and use that. Remembering that in order for us to figure out where the chin's going to drop, we need the same amount of space here, right? So this should be equivalent to this. So for me, when I measure that and I come down, it actually is. Like, for whatever reason, my face follows that Loomis thing. We discovered in yesterday's class, a lot of the students, you know, they had deviations. And it kind of depends on how you're looking. Like, I have a student that's doing one that's really like this, and there's so much jaw that's foreshortened and coming toward the viewer that it adds a lot of space down there. So it like actually doubled the size of her muzzle. Again, it's kind of weird, but yeah, muzzle shape. And so she had to make some marks and some like notes on here to help her, right? So then I'm just going to create that generic look. Next step, pull this out. And it's important to get something white behind it so you can actually see it really well, right? Okay, so what we do is we take this and we transpose it here, right? Same size. We don't have to worry about proportion at all. Okay, so if you're really worried about making this exactly the same as this, you can literally measure it and just make sure that it's the same. So I'll trace over it a few times to get a good feel for this. And then I'll just double check and see if I've got that dimension right. So like I'll take my hand, measure that there, pretty close. Measure this here, try to keep it the same. Looks good to me. Another thing that sometimes students will do is they'll take this and literally drop it over the top, like so, to see how close they are, right? So use these tools to help you. I have to flip this over. I'm gonna mess up this oval if I don't. Again, this is a quick thumbnail sketch. It's not gonna be something that I want you to spend a whole lot of time on. It's just gonna get you oriented with what's happening with the head. So now I'll double check and see what that looks like. That looks pretty well. I'm gonna go for that. It's just harder for me to like demonstrate this if it's upside down. So now I'm just gonna get the same y-axis. I'm gonna get the same x-axis. I'm gonna wrap this. I'm gonna figure out how far over that needs to be. If I need to, I can measure that too and go, okay, well that should be like that, pretty close, right? My hope is that you're gonna just start dropping things in there just because you've been doing this and you're kind of like mentally lubricated to make that happen. So now we just start with, so you can see I did not start with this first, right? Like I did with this. I'm using that traditional method of using the Loomis model, okay? So we're gonna go back to that kind of thing. Because this was gonna be my nose, I can easily say that this probably ought to be where that is. I'm gonna measure that, come down here, boom, that's my chin. Then I'm gonna finish out the model as such. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll double check to see, like, am I off in any way? Am I off in a significant way? Looks like I did get off to some degree. Looks like maybe my brow is just a little bit too high there, so I'm gonna change that up. That way it doesn't throw off my features. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I think I'm gonna go with that. I'm actually gonna cut in the chin just a touch here. Okay, so at this point, you're ready to start applying those facial features to our model here, okay? A lot of my students will, again, prefer to lay this back over the top to help them see how those facial features interact with this model. Does that make sense, right? That's gonna help you see like how the ocular cavity really ought to go instead of just picking a spot and getting really close, which is what we'll end up doing when we go much larger or triple up. So, there we go. So using this, I'm going to kind of determine how far away my ocular cavity ought to be. Again, try not to draw like the eye. Okay, a lot of people do that and they think, okay, I'm just going to draw the eye up in here. We're good. Think about how much space that eyeball, the rest of the ocular area, all that kind of stuff is going to have to encompass. So there's extra information in there besides the eye. In this case, my nose kind of protrudes out this way. If you remember when we did 3/4, that was pretty normal, right? So I'll start with the ball of that nose there, and I'll just kind of create a reference for myself. Halfway between nose and chin. In this case is not going to be the opening of my mouth because of the way that I'm like I have this top lip just pulled up really a lot, right? And I'm showing teeth. So it's almost like if I were to map out that halfway point, that it would be more like what that lip would be. And so I'll kind of use that as a point of reference to help me create the basic form and basic shape of the mouth. In order for me to really do this accurately though, I'm gonna have to get rid of this because I need to look at my reference, right? Okay, and my ear sticks out back here. So I'm just gonna kind of get those basic shapes going on. Now I'm gonna lose this. Since I have placeholders for everything, I can start looking at shape analysis, right? So I can think about how this plane of my nose is going to be kind of a triangular or prism type shape. I can start like blocking in where that cheek is going to go. Some of these planes on the top are like front of my forehead that are going to be shaded in similar ways. This is pretty ambiguous here, like my jawline. So I'll have to make some artistic or aesthetic choices here to see how I can really get that to come out. I don't want it to necessarily disappear into my neck, right? So when I start drawing these features, a lot of times I will get rid of these lines in here so they don't distract me, okay? And again, I'm not looking for something that's going to be highly specific, but should be sort of a thumbnail that helps to represent what we're doing, right? Okay, so we don't want to spend a lot of time on that necessarily, but we want to make sure it's accurate. Okay, 2 ways to get this information on that size of paper, right? With the Loomis method, if you do it right, everything's already in proportion, right? We start with that circle. If I want to make something 3 times larger than this, all I have to do is start with a circle that's 3 times larger than my original circle. Does that make sense? Like I should be able to fit like 1, 2, 3 of these inside of the circle that I make, okay? So I can work that lightly onto my paper, and then I can develop a similar model to this, only larger, right? Making sure that that works. When you work on this paper, you're gonna have to be extremely careful. Make sure that you're not pressing hard. You wanna draw very, very light. I try to use a 2 or a 4B pencil, and I literally just drag it on the surface to make marks so that I can see it. If I have to make corrections, I'm careful not to erase super, super aggressively. Every time you erase your paper, it does destroy some of your paper a little bit. I mean, you just can't get away from that. But if we really trash the surface of that paper, that nice toothy surface that we need to hold the charcoal, when you try to layer charcoal over the top, you're gonna see all of those mistakes. You're gonna see all of those imperfections of the paper texture, right? So if you choose to amplify it by using just the proportional concept of a basic unit of measure and tripling everything, right? Which honestly, a lot of my students prefer that over using a grid. You'll go immediately to your paper, right? If you feel like that's going to be really challenging for you for this project, I'll allow you to use an amplification grid. But note that, like as an artist, you shouldn't be completely reliant on gridding. All these techniques and stuff that I've taught you, they're intended to replace that basic aid, that basic tool, right? I have no problem with using an amplification grid because it is hard to take tiny things and make it a lot bigger. Like this piece back here, my reference photo for this was a little tiny thing I got out of an encyclopedia. Like it was literally maybe like 3.5 inches tall by 2 inches wide. And I had a hard time amplifying. Like I drew it, and I just couldn't get it right. So finally what I did was I gridded out my little piece, like my little reference. And I think I ended up doing like 1/4 of an inch by 1/4 of an inch squares everywhere. And then I amplified that to 1 foot by 1 foot to make it that large, right? To take something this size and make it that big. And I actually drew it just right on my wall. So that panel actually is a part of my basement, or was. So yeah, we were doing some demolition anyway. And so I just started drawing on the surface and I was like, oh, it looks great. So I just kind of like hammered it out when I was done. So we have a new wall in the basement. It looks a lot nicer than this paneling. It's kind of gross, like 1980s paneling anyway. So yeah, if you need to do the amplification grid, that's fine. What you'll do is you'll take either a new piece of this, or you'll take this same one and flip it over and put a grid on the other side. A really, really easy way for you to do that is to tape your, there we go, to tape this down to one of these gridded cutting mats, and then you can just plot points and connect them instead of measuring, right? It goes a lot faster that way. Each one of these little squares are 1/2 of an inch. So we want to make like a 1 inch by 1 inch grid, and we want to amplify it to a 3 inch by 3 inch grid. So make sure I can actually see what I'm doing. All right, so what I'll do here is I'll count like 1, 2, over, up, over, up. So I'll plot these points. You don't necessarily need to plot all these points. In theory, you could plot just like one here, right? The whole way up, the whole way over. Anybody ever done gridding before, like grid method stuff, right? Pretty common in high school, right? One of the problems with it is that you may find yourself counting rather than drawing. It throws me off every time I do it, because I'll start to draw one part of it and I'm like, okay, that looks great. And then I'll realize that what I had done was incorrect, and it's like 4 squares over, and I'll try to make it all look right, and then it just looks like a really scrambled up image, so it's kind of messed up. What's nice about creating a grid on this thing too is that you can use it for other things later. You can just slide stuff up in there. So the way I do this is I just kind of allow that Sharpie to dry. This is another way you could just go straight to it if you wanted to and not plot those points. You're going to end up with an extra 1/2 inch on one side of the short because this paper is 8.5 by 11, right? So we'll have to do a little bit of math to figure out which portion of the grid you're going to be using on the paper. You're actually going to be drawing the grid on the paper. That's another problem with the grid. A lot of times people draw their grid like super, super heavy on the paper, and then when you want to erase it, you can't, and that really, you know, in my mind, you're being too honest about your methods. Like, you really don't want people that are looking at your work to go, oh, I see how you did that. So I say this a lot, like, be dishonest about your methods. Like, you need to be somewhat of a magician and be like, no, I just made that, like, boom, out of my brain, no tools, no techniques, right? So you really, like craftsmanship with this, you really want to make sure that if you are going to use the grid method, that you're cautious to draw it extraordinarily light on your paper so that it can just go away very easily and we don't see it. So then we go the other way, right? So I'm always fascinated with, like when I demonstrate this whole grid thing, I'm always fascinated with the many ways that people can mess this up. I didn't think there were a lot of ways that people can. But using this is going to completely take that away, right? Because you don't have to measure from one side and then accidentally measure from the other and then, you know, not get something parallel, perpendicular. So essentially you would just grid the whole thing out. Make sense? You feel like you need me to show the whole thing? I think we get it, right? So then the idea is that you take your reference, which, oh, hey there, Angry Brian. So you just slide this in. And I have had some people that'll start just like amplifying, you know, with basic units of measure. And then they're like, okay, this is not working out for me. And then grid, that's great. I would try it first, just kind of quote unquote freehand without using this tool. Because if you use this tool first and then you're like, this isn't working for me, then you have to erase all that stuff off and you start again. People damage their paper a lot with that. So then, okay, there's two sides to this Lennox. It's like a multi-purpose drawing printmaking paper. There's a rougher side and there's a smoother side. You can see the texture on the rougher side, and that's what we want for this because we need something that can actually hold that charcoal, right? So if we're going to amplify, we've got to do a 3" by 3" grid. So this paper is 22 by 30. So we can get 10 of them this way, right? But we can only go out to 21 this way. So there's going to be some limitation to what we can do here to get that transposed over. So I'm just going to show a couple of little areas. What I do when I do this is I use that crow's foot and I go super light and I put it way at the bottom. I put it way on the sides so that if I do make a mistake, it's going to be on the margins of the work. So if you measured from one way, like if you started this way with the edge of your ruler, you have to do the same thing here, right? If you go back this way, your lines are going to go like this. Does that make sense? People do it all the time. I don't know why. So I'm just going to bring this way over. And when you're doing this, if you choose to use this method, you have to make sure that your ruler is extremely parallel to the edge of the paper. Like this will not work. That's going to throw everything off, right? And the reason I'm demonstrating this is because I want to show you how light you should draw in here if you choose this method. Okay. So these tiny little marks clear out the margin. You don't want anything up in here. You're going to line them up super well. And then the idea is that you are literally just going to drag your pencil. That's how light it should be. In fact, that may be a little bit dark, right? Do not use an H pencil for this. They're too hard. Even though they're supposed to be light, they're very hard. And they will crush your paper, and you're going to see a grid matrix in your drawing. Again, belying the fact that you used a tool that you don't want people to understand that you used. Okay, so we would go all the way one way like this. Then we would lay this here, same drill, 3, 3, 3. 3, 3, 3, go back the other way. Cool? All right, so we're heading back to the other classroom. What I want to start with is having you all perform that Loomis method on a clean sheet. Get a sheet of this, and we want to create that thumbnail, okay? I'm going to get set up to demonstrate starting without using this, right? Because a lot of people end up choosing that. Also, don't think that I'm trying to talk you out of it. If you want to use this method, don't be like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm like a substandard artist. You're not substandard, it's fine. It helps, it's a tool that you can use. I'm just trying to give you like a good explanation of what some of the pitfalls might be if you were to choose to do it this way. Cool? All right, so grab one, grab one. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is take this diagram, bring it over here. And I need to be mindful about how much space is going to be used here because I'm taking this, tripling it. So when I trace this on here, I don't have a lot of space down here, so it's going to be closer to the bottom. And I know that I'm going to have a little bit more space up here. Okay. So I'm just going to look at the top here first. I'm going to measure that. I'm going to like drop here and kind of help myself with the triple there. So that's roughly how far down I want to come. I know this is going to be the size that I want for a single. So if I roughly estimate that here, this here, this here, I know that my circle is going to roughly be about this big. So I'm going to get as close as I can to triple. And I'm going really, really light because I don't want to damage my paper. Now I'm going to kind of double check and see how close I am. I'm going to measure this one more time. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, pretty close. It's going to work. So now I'm going to use the Loomis model that I have here. I like to trace it out a little bit first to get a good feel for it. And I'm looking at relationships in terms of like where that is in the circle. So down here, like my oval's going to come all the way down to this area. Looks pretty good. I'm going to look at this pitch for the y axis, get that the same. I'm going to look at this pitch for the x axis, and it roughly comes halfway through. Now I'm going to bring this around. So just like I've demonstrated Loomis method in the past, same drill, just on good paper with the amplification proportion. Now I'm going to look at how much space I have here. Like it's over a little bit because it's 3/4, so it's not perfectly in the middle. So this is about half of this. So I'm going to estimate this. Or we go here. That looks like it's going to work pretty well. So I'm going to use a line here to help me with that. Then I'm going to bring this over. I'm going to bring this parallel to my y-axis. For me, it worked out to where this became my nose line. So I'm going to use that again. That's going to help me measure this because that third is going to help me there. So I'm going to come down. Just happens that's where I ended up. Now I'm going to bring this sort of generic profile. Try to get the same shapes that I have in there. Okay. So I always like to get back. When I'm doing something proportionally challenging like this, amplification, I like to get back and I like to look back and forth and just see, do I have the same proportions happening everywhere, right? So right now it looks pretty good. I advise students to either drop this back over the top or slide the image back in just to remind themselves of like where those facial features go. So just like what we did with the thumbnail. Honestly, this is not something that we want to keep the whole time. So just help us with blocking in. So I'm going to estimate where that ocular cavity ought to be. So kind of looking here, it's not like perfectly, like I couldn't probably do a crosshair here and say it's exactly, it's a little bit high as such. So it seems like I would probably map that out roughly in here. And again, I think about ocular cavity. I think about what it would look like if I were drawing a skull, because the skull dictates everything in terms of what the portrait looks like. Same thing over here. It's about the same shape really, only it just dips down more like a teardrop. But this wraps, right? So I have to get this shape to conform kind of with what I have here. Now, it's not going to be perfect, right? So after I get things kind of blocked in like this, and I begin working with charcoal, work that up in here. That's when I start making modifications. Look at the ball of the nose, and it exists kind of over here. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to look at how this contour area of the nose kind of pops back up in here. So I'm not being really detailed at this point, but I'm going to get there. Looking at that mouth area, again, the mouth is open, so it's not perfectly halfway between the top and the bottom. So kind of helps me to think about lining up the middle of the eye with the corner of the mouth, because that works out really well. So if this is about the middle of the eye, I'm probably going to be mapping that as the corner of the mouth. So I'm just going to kind of map that whole shape in there for now, just to keep it kind of somewhat generic. And then I can get in there with a lot more detail when I'm ready to do that work with the charcoal. Okay, so at this point, well, I probably ought to get my ear in there as well. Again, it's always like bottom back quadrant of that area, so that helps me understand how that's going to work. And it kicks outside of my oval, so, and again, I'm just staying extremely vague at this point, and I'm going to do a lot more to customize this and make it more recognizable. So at this point, I'm done with my limbus because I have my map and my model here. Now it's time to really evaluate the details of what's happening in here and try to push closer to a realistic depiction of what's happening, right? I don't have a lot of information in this side, at chiaroscuro side that has that intense shading in there. So I may have to rely on a digital reference for that, like zoom in, look at some of the contrast that's happening in there for more detail, but I can see what's happening here, so I'm gonna go ahead and work with that. I can't really see my eyebrows very well, so that's something I have to contend with. So let's see, I'm gonna kind of like change up the shape of the eye a little bit, pretty straight across here. And because I made everything 3 times larger, if I'm not sure if my shape is correct or if I think that I'm making the eye too big or too little, all I've got to do is measure that. Like I could measure it here, okay, 1 unit, and I can go 1, 2, 3, and realize that I am making that wide enough. So I can always go back to those analytic things that are going to help me. So I'm just going to kind of map out roughly where the pupil and the iris is going to exist. I'm going to cut in just a little bit for the eyelid. I have some area here that's going to be kind of wrinkly, and so what I'm going to do there is just like really lightly shade that a touch so that it kind of looks more like a generic area of darkness. I have a kind of a plane here that's a little bit darker as well. I'm going to map more of the nose out now that I can see what's happening there. So I want to try to match the shape that I see there. Like I see kind of a peak here. It gets a little bit straighter over here. And then I'm going to wrap around. I'm going to kind of follow this angle here. Try to get that correct. I'm going to add that nostril shape out here. That's going to lead me to this muzzle beginning, so I can kind of see how those wrinkles in my face are going to help set up the muscles around the mouth. Kind of a dimple spot here. Looking at the chin structure, I've got kind of a cleft in there, and so I'm going to map that just a little bit, get that a little darker, just kind of do some basic modeling at this point. It gets a little darker on this side, so I'm going to kind of like map that out as well. And I can see I'm going to have to change the shape of my chin. I'm going to have to modify my contour a little bit, make it more, just a little bit beefier out here. So I'm going to add more to that. I'm going to bring it in a little bit. And then this, pretty close to the description that I used for that contour, but I need to bump out the cheekbones here. And that cheekbone coincides just a little bit higher than the nose, so I'm going to bring that about here. That's where I'm going to kick out to some degree. And of course, right now I'm just kind of blocking in. Then I'm going to cut in just a touch here on this contour. And then I'm going to allow it to kick out from my brow. So the brow is going to exist at an angle kind of coming up in here. So I'm looking at the relationships, like negative and positive space relationships. What does this look like versus this in terms of a shape? What does this dark area look like in terms of how it lays in with this positive area here? Kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. Now, again, you can see that I'm not pushing hard, right? I'm not interested in a super clean contour right now because I'm going to execute all that with charcoal. Going to get some of these wrinkles kind of coming back. Just going to kind of map those to some degree. Again, I'll clean those up later. Since I kind of have this cheekbone worked out, buffed up here. I'm gonna go ahead and kind of like work off of what I have here. I'm gonna add a little bit of shading on this side, even though I don't really see a lot. I'm gonna have to do that as an aesthetic choice to really highlight this happening in here. A little bit of shading coming down here from that as well. Look at the plane that's happening up in here. It's kind of like a forehead plane that's happening there. It's a little bit darker in that spot than everywhere else. And it coincides with an eyebrow wrinkle on my forehead. So I'm gonna kind of plot that, where that goes. And then I'm gonna look at this shape in here and just imagine like, okay, how am I gonna get that shape to work with the rest of the forehead? And again, I'm just thinking of it as like a blocked in area. Again, real painterly kind of thing. Because I want to come in and allow myself the ability to make modifications later. Okay, I feel like I need to modify this a little bit on the cheek or the jaw, right? It comes out just a little bit more just by virtue of the way my face is working. And then again, some ambiguity here. So I'm gonna have to sort of map and model just a little bit with that. When I do this stuff, my main focus is just, like when I'm working in charcoal, I just select one area of the face to work on. I try not to jump around a lot. That way I'm not overwhelmed with it. I'm just gonna kind of map out the dark area where my teeth sort of recede back into shadow in my mouth. I'm not gonna map all my teeth just yet until I'm ready to actually do that, but I am gonna map out the basic separation between the top row of the teeth and the bottom row of teeth. And my two teeth here, like those incisors, they do touch my lip as such. So, and then these sort of come away like that. And then I can see my bottom teeth here. Making sure that I have that right shape for that lip, I'm gonna have to add a little bit more girth to that, but I can do that later again with my charcoal pencils. I feel like this needs to maybe come up and out just a little bit more like this. Just modify that shape to some degree. Get a little bit of the cleft of my upper lip involved in there. There's a convenient thing happening here where this dark area kind of hits the tip of my nose. So it looks like I actually may have to change that a little bit. Either I need to make my nose just a little bit bigger, or I need to curl this up just a little bit more so that I have that correct relationship happening. I am gonna kind of like detail this contour a little bit here just to make sure I have that right, because it's pretty expressive. Looks like I can see some of my eyelashes coming out from there, but I think this mapping and modeling is enough to get me where I need to go. Okay. So now I'm going to look at some of the breaks in value for the forehead here, or the head rather. Hairline, again, really, really not very descriptive, but I can see that scar on the side of my head, and so I'm going to map that just a little bit. Hairline comes out just a little bit further than that. And then I have like some weird kind of indentions on my head here, so I'm just going to kind of map where I think that that stuff ought to go. I'm not going to really detail it. I'm just going to kind of like, it's going to map in some areas that kind of get darker. And then this really dark thing happening over here. Probably not a bad idea for me to figure out what that contour is going to look like and how that's going to move over. Kind of vectoring, or thinking about it like a vector, like a shape, rather than a blended shadow. I'll do a lot with charcoal in this area later. And it comes all the way down to like right above this eyebrow here. So just mapping this stuff so that later I don't have to make decisions like this. At this point, I would go ahead and get rid of all of my Loomis modeling. And again, I'm extremely careful when I erase. Like I'm using the minimal amount of pressure that I can to get rid of this extra line work because I don't want to damage my paper too much. Where you're going to see that in the charcoal. So I just want to bring it down to like what I've mapped out at this point. And any mistakes that I made that I may have to correct later, I'm going to take care of that first thing. I always use a plastic eraser when I do this. Never want to use a gum eraser or a pink eraser. They're too aggressive. So these plastic or vinyl erasers really work pretty well. And then I try not to smudge or smear if I can get away with it. A lot of times I'll just use a big brush, dust it off, or I can blow it off kind of thing. So I feel like I have a pretty good thing started here. It's mapped out pretty well. This kind of looks like I need to modify just a little bit, like maybe make this a little longer, and so I think I'm going to do that real fast. And there's a lot of kind of wrinkly things happening in here. So I think I'm actually going to take my nose line that I created in here. I'm just going to like modify that a little bit. Maybe make that a little bit more, make this a little more dramatic in terms of coming in here. I think I'm going to go ahead and want to get that angle a little bit more severe. Give myself something to work with when I'm ready to start mapping and modeling. I think it's going to help to get some shadowing in here too, to kind of help show that side of my face, that side plane. It's going to help things kind of fit. I have a little contour in here that I'm going to map in. It's going to kind of come this way. Get my neck mapped out, which looks like it's about like right in here. I think I'm going to need a little bit more information with this because it very much has that floating head problem. So I am going to have to include some of this contextual information, like the shirt that I see in there, and kind of how that's working with the form. Looks like it kind of comes up just underneath the chin here. It starts to come this way. Looks like this is going to go like this, kind of curl out that way. I got a little bit of this kind of coming back here. Kind of get an indication of that shoulder, an indication of where this kind of fades out over here. My next step is going to be to start blocking in vine charcoal and just getting some of the basic values in there, and then I'm going to start really like making a good likeness happen here.